We need to have a conversation about Ange Postecoglou and if Tottenham Hotspur should sack Ange. Now, unless you've been living under a rock, there's been a lot of news today in the last 24 hours about Ange's future, and it's heating up. Now, Footy Insider put out a report earlier today to basically say that Tottenham had sacked Ange. And I'm going to tell you this now. In the 6 years I've been working in the football media space, Footy Insider has never broken a story and that story be correct. Ange could be sacked next week. But that's not because Footy Insider knew that a week before everyone else. It's because they guessed that and they will claim they knew a week before everyone else. I think if Ange had been sacked this morning when Footy Insider broke that story, I think David Ornstein or Romano would have confirmed it by now. Within 2 or 3 hours, David Ornstein and Romano is going to know if Ange has been sacked. Footy Insider aren't going to know that hours before everyone else. I do think that was a guess. But what we do know from reliable sources is Tottenham are in talks with Thomas Frank. We know Tottenham are in talks with Thomas Frank. We know there's been interest there for a while. And the question is, if Tottenham are in talks with Thomas Frank, well, then they're clearly considering sacking Ange because you wouldn't be having talks with another manager. Santi is a good source of information. Alistair Gold, who is one of the best sources of information for Tottenham news, has said, that he doesn't know anything about this Ange being sacked story that's coming out from Footy Insider, and he said this about an hour ago. But he did say Tottenham chairman Daniel Levy is still believed to be weighing up the future of Ange Postecoglou as he faces a crunch decision over the direction of the club. It's something being considered. Right now, from the reliable sources, they've not decided to sack Ange, but it's something being considered, okay? And we're going to talk in today's video, is Tottenham sacking Ange the right decision? I'm going to give my thoughts on that. Now, interestingly, Sasha Tavoli, who is an okay source of information, it was the first source of information to say that Wirtz had chosen Liverpool, which about 50 minutes later was confirmed by David Ornstein, did say just now, really, that Tottenham have decided to sack Ange. So there could be a possibility that there is some truth and there could be something coming out tonight or tomorrow. But until David Ornstein says it, until Romana says it, or until like Alistair Gold says it, or one of the good Tottenham journalists that you trust, like Paul O'Keefe, I probably wouldn't say that Ange has been sacked now. But I want to have a conversation about Ange and if he should be sacked, because there's sort of two arguments for it. It's like, well, actually, he's won a trophy at Tottenham when everybody's fit, he's got a good record, and, well, can you trust Daniel Levy to back the next manager? And as a Man United fan, weirdly, I think we can relate to Tottenham on a lot of things. Obviously Manchester United, there's always a little bit more expectations. We've got a little bit more money to spend. But Man United and Tottenham have been quite similar in the sense of we both know, regardless of who the manager is, the biggest problem is the ownership. And we're both graveyards for managers, both Man United and Tottenham. We can sack a manager, but the next manager that comes in ultimately doesn't do well. And a lot of it is due to the incompetence above the manager. And it's like, right now, I can kind of relate to how Tottenham fans feel because every Tottenham fan wanted pretty much Ange gone. He won the Europa League. Now most Tottenham fans want Ange to stay. This was the same with Ten Hag. Every Man United fan nearly wanted Ten Hag out. A lot of us, some of us like me, I was Ten Hag in the whole way because I was like, this club is the problem. I think the next manager is going to fail after Ten Hag. But Ten Hag won the FA Cup, and all of a sudden, like, it went to, like, I think 80% of Manchester United fans voted they wanted to keep Ten Hag this time last year after he won the FA Cup, when it was about 25% before he'd won the FA Cup, maybe 30%. And I think that's similar to Tottenham. Now that Ange has won a trophy, everyone wants him to stay. And ultimately, winning a trophy at Tottenham, I do think is a bigger achievement than winning a trophy at Manchester United. But when Ten Hag stayed and got back the following season, it set Man United back even further. And the question is, if you keep Ange because, you're in this hype and re-envisionment the last 2 weeks, is this Europa League going to cover the cracks of an awful season with 22 losses? But at the same time, you can say, has Amorim made Man United better? Had Amorim come in the summer, I'm sure he probably would have made Man United better with the backing. But, Man United's squad was just crap and the next one just come in and been worse. So you could say, yeah, but Man United sat Ten Hag, and they probably should have sat Ten Hag after winning the FA Cup, but they've not got better under Amorim. So it's really hard to actually say, oh, should Ange be sacked? Should Ange not be sacked? But as good as Thomas Frank is, I think as a Manchester United fan, I, in my opinion, would lean more towards Ange staying than being sacked. There's an argument either way, purely off the fact that Thomas Frank worked in a stable environment at Brentford. Going to Tottenham, being a manager at Tottenham and being a manager at Manchester United is different to any other club because you are working with people that aren't good to work with, don't have the best footballing brain. Their whole ambition is, let's just get top four so you get the Champions League money. And that is the whole ambition. So let's have a breakdown of Ange and points for why he should stay, points for why he shouldn't stay, and my conclusion. So, This is one of the big reasons why I'm feeling more that Tottenham should maybe keep Ange outside of him winning the Europa League next season. So I've done some maths and I've done the research. The games when Udogie, Porro, Van der Ven, Romero started together, there was 21 games. In those 21 games, Tottenham won 16. They drew 2 and they lost 3. That would be the equivalent of 50 points in 21 games. To put that into context, Liverpool, who won the league this season, got 48 points in their first 21 games. Now, obviously, some of these games weren't played in the Premier League, some of them were played in the Europa League. And, the chances of all 4 of them being fit for the first 21 Premier League games this season is different. But what I'm saying is, Ange Postecoglou, when he's had Udogie, Porro, Van der Ven, and Romero as the back four starting together in a match, would have got 50 points in 21 games if these were all Premier League games. So that's 16 wins in 21 games, which would put Tottenham top of the league. Now, I'm not saying that is going to happen and that it's all of that, but I'm saying when his best back four is fit, the football Tottenham play, the record is incredible. And you cannot take that away from Ange. He's had a lot of injuries. The 22 losses in the league this season is atrocious. How Tottenham are playing at the end of the season is atrocious. But when you take in the context of the injuries, when you take into account the fact that the last 10 games Tottenham were focusing on the Europa League, and about the last 3 or 4 games it was a heavily rotated lineup. The last game they were hungover. Of those 22 losses, 5 of them Tottenham had given up already, so that takes it down to 17, and a good 10 of them was just due to mass amounts of injuries. And if you look at all of Tottenham's losses until the last 3 or 4 games of the season, there was pretty much 1 goal in every loss or every draw. They had a significantly better goal difference than other sides. So when you look at Ange, you could say, look how good he is when he's got his best back four. But it isn't, I feel like, a simple yes or no, because I think there's a re-envisionment around Ange, in the sense of he's won the Europa League. Tottenham fans must feel amazing. Like, I felt great when we won the FA Cup, but the Europa League's better than the FA Cup. And this is Tottenham's first trophy in like nearly 20 years. So Tottenham fans must feel amazing. They've won the Europa League, and you get these emotions where all of a sudden you love Ange. Some of you couldn't stand Ange 2 months ago, wanted to go and you love him. And now you're like, well, he could have sacked him in March when things were awful. You can't sack him now, he's won the trophy. There's going to be some re-envisionment there. And while I'm leaning towards keeping Ange, I do think sometimes you have to take the emotional side out of it and say, well, what is the bigger picture? Because this is what he did in the league. He did adapt in the Europa, and that won in the Europa, but he didn't adapt in the league. I know he had this injury, this, and this, but with this, and this, could he have done better? Probably yes in the league. Was this good enough in the league? Absolutely not. Was he focusing on Europa? Of course, but you have to look at the first 30 games as a league. The last 8 games you can say, okay, was focusing on Europa. Game 20 to 30, despite the injuries, was atrocious. So I think sometimes there is that, and I think Tottenham fans might have that emotional thing towards Ange because he's won a trophy and given them best 2 weeks of their life to keep him. But if you do start next season badly, if you go into the September international break next season and you've got like 2 points from your opening 3 games, sack Ange is going to start all over again 3 games into the season after you've just spent a load of money in the summer. Well, I say spent a load of money, it's Daniel Levy, who knows? That's the debate. But then I also say this, because Daniel Levy is so untrustworthy, you can bring in a manager that's a great manager and he can come to Tottenham and he could be crap. And if Thomas Frank comes to Tottenham, and because Daniel Levy's been Daniel Levy and it's a different ballgame at Tottenham and it's crap after 10 games, there's just going to be everyone saying, well, Ange never got his 3rd season. And that's going to spin on Daniel Levy. So let's have a conversation about Tottenham. Early season, I thought Tottenham were exciting. Fans were sort of buying into it a little bit because Ange's first season, the first half was unbelievable. The second half wasn't great, but you got 5th place. And you did quite well in Ange's first season, which, considering the season before Ange came in was atrocious, that was real big positive for Tottenham. Second season started well. You were, I think, with the first 10 games of the season, you were only 1 point behind Arsenal after the first 10 games of this season. You beat Manchester United 3-0. You beat Manchester City 4-0. There was elements of Tottenham where I think they were 7th. They were 7th, but they were 2 points off 3rd. They were 1 point behind Arsenal in 5th, in the first 10 games of the season. But as the season wore on, Spurs became predictable, exposed. However, the injuries were crazy. Whenever Mickey Van der Ven gets injured, Tottenham seem to just fall off a cliff. And clearly, this summer, the biggest thing Tottenham could do is bring in a good centre-back. Bring in a good centre-back. Probably a left-sided centre-back. Maybe Martin Gueye, because he can play left and right. He should come in if Romero goes. But Tottenham need to bring in a good left-sided centre-back this summer, without a doubt. Because Mickey Van der Ven's impact on that team is crazy. But the football became chaotic, the tactical setup stopped working, and Ange lacked flexibility. And Ange's tactics and the way he set up Tottenham in the Premier League games were atrocious. But then he would go to Bodo, he'd go to Frankfurt, and he'd go into the Europa League final with different tactics, different game plan, and get it spot on to win those games. But he didn't apply it in the Premier League, but he applied it in the Europa League. He was doing something different in the Europa League to the Premier League. And assuming he's not going to do the defensive one-off game tactics that he did in the Europa League in the Premier League game next season, is his Premier League form going to continue? Or having the right backing, having the right players in, all of a sudden, is his Premier League form going to get back up to first season Ange? You get the best back four fit, Romero stays, couple good signings, top number 6, top winger, back up to Solanke so he's not run down. And Tottenham have a good base lineup. So I'm always going to say this. I'm leaning towards Tottenham keeping Ange because I think with the injuries and I think with the right backing and I think with the trophy and the mood, I think it's better and safer to keep him, especially because you just don't know how another manager is going to perform under Daniel Levy. But there is the question of, would this be an emotional-based decision? You've got to look at the long-term project, the goals. Does it align with Ange? But I think Levy's the common denominator. It's like the Glazers at Manchester United. There's always a common denominator. Man United and Tottenham are two clubs where managers fail. They sink. They have a good season. They get in the Champions League. Everyone's happy. Whenever Man United get in the Champions League, the following summer, we have a disappointing transfer window because the club's happy with the Champions League. They don't feel that we need to invest. Whenever we're not in the Champions League, which is a lot more lately, we do spend a lot in the summer. And I feel like with Tottenham, Levy's a bit like that. It's about getting in the Champions League, being a fourth place team. There's no ambition to do any more. So I feel like every coach could come to Tottenham, but they might hit the same ceiling until Levy commits to a long-term footballing strategy and puts Tottenham above finances. Ange may not be perfect, but any manager that comes to Tottenham is going to need the right support to succeed. And the feeling is, you sack Ange and Daniel Levy does what he does to the next manager's bad. People are just going to say, well, why did you sack Ange? There's going to be questions. Now, in terms of reasons to stick with Ange, I've obviously spoken about his best back four being fit. I also think that it's still in a rebuild, and you could say, but this is Ange's third season. Ange, in his second season, only got one player that wasn't a teenager in Solanke in his second season last summer. That was not good enough. I do think if you look at Tottenham's base 11, you get a backup to Solanke, you get a backup to Van der Ven, and you get a top number 6 and a top winger, and I think Tottenham are in a good position. I guess being in the Champions League, you maybe want a bit of depth in other areas as well. There's questions over Vicario, but they are, for me, the 4 areas that Tottenham need to do, assuming Romero stays. And did originally bring energy, identity, and attacking intent to Spurs' first season. Tottenham are one of my favourite teams to watch in Ange's first season. They'd always concede, but they'd always score. And I think Ange made Tottenham, for a couple of months, enjoyable for the first time since Poch, but then also made Tottenham the worst they'd ever been for a couple of months in the league as well. So you can argue it both ways. I always feel constantly hitting the reset button doesn't help the long-term project, but if you are going to hit the reset button, you have to hit it in the summer. I will say this now. Had Manchester United sat Ten Hag in the summer, I think we'd have been in a different position. Amrin has been worse than Ten Hag, but I don't think he would have been worse than Ten Hag had we sat Ten Hag in the summer. I do think if you're going to sack a manager, you've got to sack a manager in the summer. So this is why it's a big decision for Tottenham. But all of a sudden, you're sacking him 2 weeks after he's won a trophy. There's going to be outrage from the fan base. And if that decision goes wrong, it's all up against Daniel Levy. It's all up against Tottenham. And I felt never got back last summer. You could say he spent money. Bergwall was great. It was a great investment. He done really well. But Bergwall was a 19-year-old kid. There was no expectation for him to be Tottenham's best midfielder and arguably Tottenham's best player last season. And, you got lucky that your recruitment was bang on there. But from mid-season to end of the season, Tottenham were atrocious. But I don't think Ange got backed. Now, there is a case to argue sacking Ange. He was not flexible tactically in the league. He was in the Europa, but not in the league. Poor performances, big moments, and there was times where the squad looked disconnected. And while the fans love Ange and have had the best 2 weeks of their life, in March, you were seeing incidences with Ange in the stadium and fans and the turning and the toxicity. Next season starts poor. I'll tell you this now, Manchester United winning the FA Cup, within 2 games of the following season, that high had worn off. So winning the Europa League is going to wear off as soon as next season starts, that vibe. And it could turn negative quick, like it did with United and Ten Hag. And this is the right time to find a replacement. That is the question. Now, look, I always say this. If you were going to sack Ange and your plan was to bring in Graham Potter, then you were idiots. If you're going to sack Ange and your plan is to bring in Southgate, you were idiots. If you were going to sack Ange, but your plan was to bring in like a really good, proven manager, like Hansi Flick, then I'd be saying, look, sack Ange. I'd sack Ange for Hansi Flick, even though we'd won the Europa League, because you know what I mean? That is Hansi Flick, not that Hansi Flick is going to come near Tottenham. It's also a question of the manager. I think Thomas Frank is a very good manager, but I also think it's different managing at Brentford to Tottenham, so it's still a risk. It's not like Hansi Flick where I'm like, yes, sack Ange. But it's not like Graham Potter, I'm like, don't sack Ange for Graham Potter. This is someone that's like, well, technically, you can argue he's a better manager than Ange, but would he do it at Tottenham? That is the question with Thomas Frank, because he's very good at making subtle changes, very good at maximising his players, very good at making subtle changes, and he doesn't overcomplicate things. He's someone that likes to use the players he has and profile the players he has correctly to get the best out of them, Thomas Frank. He's a good man manager. He lost Ivan Toney, he can adapt. He lost this player, he can adapt. And he is proven in the Premier League. And Brentford, every time everyone thought they were going to go down, they always do better than expected. They lose Toney. People thought they were going to finish 16th this season. I think they came 10th or 11th. You know, but he's been at Brentford 7 years and he's had a mad amount of support around him that you might not get at Tottenham. And I think if you sack Ange and you bring in another manager, you risk falling into the same cycle of new manager comes in, all of a sudden you've got to reset some of the squad. Some of these players have been brought for Ange. Will Thomas Frank want them? You obviously can get the best out of the players, but like Arne Slot got the best out of Klopp's players, but ultimately, could it destabilise things? The Spurs players are clearly behind Ange now. Could sacking Ange destabilise things? So anyway, sort of going into my final verdict, I'm leaning towards keeping Ange. You know, unless someone like Hansi Flick was like, I want the Tottenham job, I feel give him a stronger shot. And the reason I'm leaning towards keeping him isn't just because he won the Europa League. I think had he lost the Europa League, I would have said sack him. But I also think I taking into account what he does with his best back forfeit, and if he can get, you know, a Van der Ven backup that's reliable, a top number 6, a top winger, and a Solanke backup, I do think he can do well. You know, I get why people want change. I could understand if Thomas Frank was brought in because you did lose 22 games in the league. Injuries or not, that's not acceptable. But I still think the biggest question is Levy ready to back him long term? Because if Levy sticks with Ange, he's got to back him. He's won your first trophy in 17 years. He's got you back in the Champions League, which has got you £85 million more. If you stick with Ange Postecoglou now, Levy, you got to back him. And will he? That's the question.